Welcome to the apex of sports ownership, the Apex Athletic Collective.
Welcome in everyone to episode 78 of Instigate Success. I am your host as always, Jake Schoen, aka Jakeymuffins, here every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern to about 10 p.m. or so. We've got this week's episode of the official Hoosier State Instigators podcast. Again, we're streaming live both on here on the Twitch and Patreon. So again, the podcast, we're going to be streaming that live on Twitch now, and then also for all of our Patreon members. And this past week, if you are one of our followers, subscribers, you may have seen we did another live rebroadcast of a game, not the live game, but a live rebroadcast. So instead of us recording that and then posting up afterwards, we posted it as we recorded it. So we did that live on Twitch and then also again over on our YouTube. So that is what we did this past week. If you guys caught that, that was for the matchup against the Kings. We had that doubleheader a couple of weeks ago between the Kings on that first matchup on the Saturday, and then we had the game against the Lions on that Sunday. Unfortunately, our footage on that Lions game, though, is kind of corrupted, so we weren't able to do the live stream or a rebroadcast for that. There is the Lions broadcast of that game, as well as like the Minotaur streaming broadcast of that game. So we would recommend to watch that. I don't know if we'll be able to get that fixed as far as the issue that we had with our footage in that game, which is unfortunate because obviously that wound up being a great game for us. Obviously, one we wish we could share, but there is at least other alternatives as far as how to be able to watch that game. But I don't know exactly what happened with that footage. Somehow the camera feed, again, we've got that AI camera, which is wonderful most of the time. Just run into a few issues from time to time with it, but somehow it seemed to kind of overlap the images it was taking in, where it was creating a feed that looked like there were four teams on the court simultaneously, which obviously is not the case. But it showed it so there would be nobody on the court, and then it would also mirror the images on the court, so it looked like each end of the courts had two separate games going on. But that's something we're still trying to see if we can get that figured out. But as far as the time being, we have not been able to. And so that is the reasoning behind that. But we did get that Kings game put back up. A close game there, one that came down to the wire with an opportunity for the Instigators to pull off another upset. However, things did not fall our way at the end. 2-point loss for your Hoosier State Instigators in that game. Closest game we've had against the Kings. Kings always a very solid team, led by the Mitchells, especially Cameron Mitchell, one of the most dynamic scorers in the ABA. But that is what we had going on this past week. No game last weekend. We had the bye weekend for the Super Bowl. That's why we did that live stream on Super Bowl Sunday. This week, though, we do have a game coming up. We got a game not tomorrow, Sunday actually. So a little bit different than what we had on the schedule originally. I think originally we had that matchup against the Monsters tomorrow, but that is no more because of the matchup against Monsters is no more because as far as have been told, the Monsters are no longer playing games this season. So obviously we hope to have them back in the league next season, but at this point it does not look like they will be continuing for this season. A team that joined the ABA this being their first season, so hopefully that we can get things figured out and they'll be able to come back next year. But because of that, we had to rearrange our schedule a little bit. So we've got that game on Sunday now. It's going to be our last home game of the season at Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana. It will be against the Maysville Miners. So that game gets kicked back to this weekend instead of that originally scheduled March 1st weekend. And let's see. We'll share the screen. I didn't get the time to throw it on a slide, but I can share the screen over where we posted that over on the Facebook with that updated new schedule. So let me just make sure I got that up. And here we go. So we got the updated new schedule for the remainder of the season here. So a little bit of an update as far as these games go. And I apologize, I don't have anything signed in on this tab, so it's a little blocked off. But we've got the game this Sunday, our last home game against the Maysville Miners. And that again, that's at Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana. You can get your game tickets for that for the last Instigators home game. Then we'll be on the road. We have two tough matchups and a back-to-back, another back-to-back weekend with a Saturday game against the Kings and then a Sunday game against the Aces, both on the road. So going to Cincinnati, then to Nashville the next day. That's going to be the following weekend, the weekend of the 22nd and the 23rd. So we've got three good games here to wrap up the season. Maysville Miners, a team that took down the Lions this year as well in the early on in their inaugural season. The Kings, again, a team that's always competitive, that we have close matchups against, and we're still looking for that first win against. And then we get on the road against the Aces, another team we've had several close matchups with, but we have been able to secure victory against the Aces, and we look to hope to continue that streak. But that's what we got coming up. Those are the last three games of the regular season. So after next weekend, the regular season 2 of the Instigators ABA playing is going to be coming to an end, and that's what we got. So 3 games left in the regular season, and then it is playoff time. So we'll jump and look at the playoffs. Take a look and see what we're um, you know got down the path here with the remaining 3 games. What we could be looking at, what is realistic, and obviously what the playoffs could look like for your Hoosier State Instigators. So let's do that. But let's jump over and take a look at the games from around the league this past weekend. Actually, let's do the power rankings here. So take a look at the power rankings real quick, and then we'll look at the scores from around the division from this past weekend, and the matchups coming up this weekend around the division. All right, so we got the power rankings over here. You see at the top, Chicago Fury still undefeated, 16-0, up at that number 1 spot. Again, they're pretty much going to be solidly in that number 1 spot until someone is able to defeat them, give them their first loss in about 2 years. So that is, obviously the team I think everybody's got circled right now for the favorite, the front runner to be the champion this season in the ABA. But a team that we have played pretty close in the 2 matchups we've had, both 10-point games, and those are games I feel like we've got a shot when it does come to playoff time if we can pull everything together. But we see there's still a couple of other teams undefeated, number 2 and number 3, Silicon Valley Panthers, a team that was in the Final Four last season as well, representing out west. And then we got the Austin Bats at 13-0. couple of teams there with 1 losses. Then you jump down and you see the number 11 team, the Indiana Lions, fell to the number 11. Now they are 17-4. They had another loss handed to them this weekend. It's over here on the side, if I remember. Windy City Inferno. That is who it was. 1 point victory for the Inferno, 107-106. And that is a team in our division, so another team to keep an eye on as far as power rankings and the standings for our division go. They are up to the number 2 seed in our division. I think they've got themselves in a pretty good spot now with that victory. You can see there they jumped up to number 18 with a solid 11-5 record there. Nashville Aces at 15. Again, that's a team we've still got a matchup remaining against, so we still got another matchup against a ranked team there. And then you see there the rest of the top 25. Also got a couple of teams they added this week to the power rankings as far as teams to watch. So that's what we got going on as far as power rankings across the league in the ABA, pointing out the teams that we've played against and got some matchups coming up against. But that's going to be the power rankings. We'll jump over to the division, see the games around the league and what we got coming up here this weekend as well as the past weekend. Right, we got that over here. I don't think this updated right, so we'll give it one more refresh, go back to it. So just 3 games remaining on the schedule for your Hoosier State Instigators. Not too many games left across the league either for the other teams in our division. Skipping through here until we get to this past weekend. So obviously our game 2 weekends ago with a 110-104 victory over the Indiana Lions. This past weekend, it looks like maybe that game did not happen though between the Rebels and the Wisconsin Frost. But we did have that 1 point victory for the Inferno over the Lions, and then a significant victory also for the Fury with a 169-78 victory over the Greyhounds. Those were the only games played this past weekend within the division. Obviously, you had the Super Bowl on Sunday, so that I'm sure that limited some of the action as well. Coming up this week, so tomorrow, looks like that game between the Frost and the Saints was canceled. Have to keep an eye on that because it looks like that other game there with the Frost may not have happened either. But the Frost, have to check in and see what's going on with the Frost here. But as far as I know, they are still competing. They are currently 1 spot behind us in that number 5 seed. But coming up tomorrow, there's also the matchup there between the 402 Elite and the Windy City Inferno. 402 Elite, a pretty decent team as well. I think they are leading their division, but we'll look at that here in a little bit. But at 8-2 against the Inferno, 11-5, that should be a good matchup on paper. So a game I'll be looking forward to seeing tomorrow. Then we got the Fury taking on the Strong Mountain Steppers. And then, as I mentioned, we had that game originally scheduled against the Midwest Monsters. That game is not going to happen. That game is off. Instead, we will be playing the Maysville Miners on Sunday instead. Fury have another game as well this weekend against the Grizzlies. So that's what we got coming up this weekend. But looking ahead, we really, again, there's not much left in the season. You have to scroll. You can see the whole schedule there, almost, almost. Maybe next week we'll be able to do that. But you can see almost the whole schedule there for the rest of the season. Coming up after this weekend, we got the game against the Ohio Kings and the Aces. Both of these games did get pushed back one day, so this will be Saturday, and that'll be a Sunday matchup for us. Obviously, the Friday night game is not going to be something we're able to get pulled off, just logistically. So it is actually a day off for both of those. But you also see a couple of matchups that I don't anticipate happening. So the Monsters against the Frost. Again, I don't believe the Monsters are competing any further. So I think that's not going to happen. Then we've got the Southland Saints taking on the Lions. And the other games here on the schedule, I don't think are going to be happening either. So a lot of fluidity here in the end of the regular season schedule throughout our division and the ABA. Obviously, there's changes within teams and opponents and availabilities, so that stuff does happen. But the Pitbulls, I don't believe are competing any further. So both of those games against the Saints don't believe will be happening. And then our game against the Miners, we shifted up for this weekend. So that will pretty much wrap up the season after next weekend. Then I think this weekend in March is actually going to wind up being the play-in tournament. So a little bit of a deviation there from the original schedule, but that should get things kicked off a little bit faster as far as playoffs and play-ins. And that is what we got going on. So as far as the division goes, looks like we've got 3 games left, so 3 opportunities to get victories. And the Fury, it looks like, have 2 more games on their schedule as far as that goes. And then the other teams in the division, the Inferno, just the number 2 seed, they jump up to that number 2 seed, or they've been in that number 2 seed, I think, for a week or two. But they've got one more game, at least on the schedule listed, and that's this weekend against the 402 Elite. The next team in standings would be the Southland Saints. They have a couple more games on the schedule, but again, it looks like there's some fluidity in that as well, due to the nature of the teams that they are playing. And then also having that note there that the game against the Frost is canceled. Not sure how many games they will actually get played, but it looks like they would have at least one more game with that matchup against the Indiana Lions there. The other matchups they have on the schedule most likely will not happen, and I'm not sure if they're going to be rescheduling or for different opponents or not. So we'll just assume that there is one more game for the Southland Saints remaining. So that puts it at 2 for the Fury, 1 for the Inferno, and 1 for the Saints. Then we got the Frost just below us in the standings, and I'm not sure how many games they will be playing at this point because the games that they have on the schedule do not seem to be happening. So Frost, I would say, are pretty solidly where they're going to be as far as the final record goes. But we'll look at the standings here and take a look at where our playoffs look within our division, and then around the league as well, and keep an eye around some of those matchups around the league. So the Fury, yeah, they have locked up that number 1 seed. I was going to say pretty much, but they have officially locked up that number 1 seed within the division. I think they've actually locked that up a few weeks ago, but they have officially, at this point, the first time I've said it, officially locked up that number 1 seed for the Chicago Fury. They will be the favorites in the Black Division in the Central Region. Then we've got the Windy City Inferno at number 2, 11-5, got themselves 4 games behind and pretty solidly set in that number 2 seed. They've got I think one more matchup is what we said. One more matchup for them and one more matchup for the Saints. So there is a possibility as far as a tiebreaker or a tie goes. However, tiebreaker would be the point differential, which the Inferno have a very significant point differential there. So they have nearly locked themselves up for that number 2 seed. Again, that's not going to be official until things shake out this weekend. But that point differential is very, very significant as far as the difference, about 200 points. So very unlikely for them to fall below that 2 seed. So 1 and 2 pretty much are locked up there. Then we've got the Saints at number 3. They've got at least one more game on the schedule, and then we'll have to see if they get any of the remaining games that they have scheduled replaced, or if that'll wrap up their season. But that puts them at 8-4 currently, and that would put them 5 games out of first. And we'll have to see as far as the games played, and then how strict and lenient they are with the cutoffs on that. I know in the past they have been a little bit more lenient on that cutoff because of the nature of some teams, folding throughout the season that were originally on other opponents' schedules. But the Saints, I believe, they may even get a forfeit victory as a result of one of those matchups because they do have a home matchup that will not be happening. So they may have 2 games on the schedule actually, and that I think that'll get them closer to that threshold. And if they get that forfeit, that would also bump them up a little bit. And then we've got ourselves at 7-7. We've got 3 games left on the schedule, which puts us in a unique position, I should say. We are 7-7, 14 games. We'll have 17 on the schedule when things are all said and done here on the second season. But that means there's no way that we can finish the season at 500 in the regular season, at least, because we've got 3 games left and we're currently at 7-7. There's a total of 17 games. It's not an even number of games. It's going to have to be either a winning or a losing record. So hopefully we can finish this season with our first ever winning record in Instigator's history. Obviously that's something we would love to do, but that's what we got coming up in the next 3 weeks to get figured out. So we'll have to win 2 of the 3 for that to happen. Otherwise, we will fall below 500 again and finish the season for a second straight season with a losing record, albeit an improved record overall, though, regardless of the outcome of the next 3 games. We find ourselves, though, 2 games behind the Southland Saints. So for us to jump up to that number 3 seed, we are probably going to need a lot of things to fall our way. I don't think it's mathematically impossible at this point, but it is going to take a lot of things, I think, to fall our way for that to happen. Obviously, first thing is we'd have to win out all our games, and I think we're going to need the Saints to lose out our remaining games. But again, I think they got that one game that may wind up counting as a forfeit for them because it is a home game scheduled that they will not be able to play due to the other teams not competing, and that would put them, as another win in that column. So we would need to win all of those games, and then don't know, again, just because of how things will get played out, how many games they'll wind up finishing with. But I think we're going to have a couple more games than them. So then it'll go by that winning percentage. And then if there is a tie in that end, then it would go by the point differential, which right now we do have a slight lead on. But again, we're gonna need to win out the rest of the season for us to consider looking into the possibility of jumping up to that 3 seed. Then you got the Frost there at the 5 seed, and they are at 4-7, a game and a half back. And I don't think they have got enough games left on the schedule to jump up to that 4 seed. But if they do add some games onto their schedule, then there is a possibility of that as well. They are currently a game and a half behind us. So obviously they have that opportunity there as well. But I would say for the most part, it looks like this will most likely be the standings when we hit the play-in games within the division. You'll also note update from all the previous weeks. The Midwest Monsters, they are no longer there. They were the number 6 seed, but as I mentioned, they are no longer competing at a full capacity, and they will not be competing further this season. TBD on their future. But that that drops them out of the standings here within the division. That also shifts the play-in procedures. So again, the top 3 teams are going to be locked into the playoffs. So that looks like right now it would be the Fury, Inferno, and the Saints. But the top 3 teams, they do lock themselves into that playoff matchup in the divisional playoff round for our respective division, the Central Region Black Division. Then the play-in game is going to be quite literally just one game. It's not going to be a playoff tournament. It'll just be between the 4 and 5 seed, which right now would be between the Frost and us. And if that happens, it would be, I believe, going to be the 5 at the 4 seed. So we may wind up having another game here in Fishers, Indiana at the Best Choice Fieldhouse. So possibly an opportunity there. But if not, if we jump up to that 3 seed, then this game this weekend on Sunday is going to be our final matchup of the season at our home venue for season 2. Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana. Wonderful venue that I've been able to visit a few times here this season. I wish I could have gone a few more times. Just haven't been able to arrange things for that to happen. But I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to come back there next season as well. I'm sure we'd love to do that. So might not be a final goodbye, but for this season, there is a chance that Sunday will be the last time we're over on the home court of the Instigators at Best Choice Fieldhouse. But that's what we around the division. So looking likely that it'll be a matchup between the Frost and the Instigators in that first play-in round, and that'll just be that game. Winner of that game will then move on and face the Fury the following weekend, as the Inferno and Saints would match up again based off of the current standings. And then the winner of those 2 respective games would then round up again the next day and play each other for the division title. Division title then moves on to the regional round of playoffs. So we've got that coming up here. Play in game, I think tentatively would be the weekend of March 1st, March 2nd. Still TBD as far as the exact date and time on that, obviously, because we need the standings to get finalized. But that is most likely scenario for what we've got in the play-ins. And then once we hit the playoffs, I believe it's going to be the following weekend, that weekend of March 8th and 9th. But I think that is what we've got on the schedule coming up here. And then the play offs will continue. And I think the actual Final Four there in the ABA is a little bit earlier than last season. Let me double check that real quick. But yeah, so it was April 20th weekend last season. It looks like it's going to be the weekend of April 5th. And because of that, that is why some of these things are going to get pushed up just a little bit, because we've got 5 weekends in March to play through, and then we've got the first weekend then in April would be the matchups in the championship finals and the All-Star game. So we'll have first week in March would be the play-ins, divisions in the second week, regions then in the following weeks. So at least that's tentatively what I would have, um, penciled in there. And then normally there is at least a week break between region championship, the regional championship, and then once you get the regional champions, then you go into that final four and championship weekend playoffs. So that's what we've got tentatively scheduled, at least for the next month or so, is what we'll be looking at. But we will have at least one more game for your instigators after we get through that remaining regular season, the last three games. But let's jump over and look at the rankings in the standings within the whole entire ABA. Take a look at some teams we could be seeing here in the playoffs. So obviously we covered our division there. Then we've got the blue division in the central region, the Columbus Wizards, currently at the top there with a one-game lead over the Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets not a ton of games though on the schedule, so it'll be interesting to see if they hit that minimum threshold. That whole division is a little bit lower on the side of number of games played there, but we've played against the Wizards a few times, a very competitive opponent, one that has gotten the better side of us in the matchups this season. And then we've got the red division with the Lions up on top. A couple of losses, though, have knocked them down as far as their winning percentage. Still do have a 2.5 game lead over the Nashville Aces, and a lot of that has to do with the number of games the Lions have played. Um, but they got themselves at 23 games, so they've definitely hit that threshold. They will be in the playoffs, so they'll be in the playoffs. Then we got the Aces just behind them. A team will be playing here, as well as the Kings, and actually the remainder of our schedule is right there. The 2, 3, and 4 teams in the red division, the division we were in last season within the central region, will be playing the Miners on Sunday. I'm currently at 4-6. Then we've got the Kings the next weekend on Saturday, at 7-3 currently, and then we got the Aces at 11-3. So some good matchups there coming up this weekend and then the next weekend to round out the regular season for the Hoosier State Instigators. And then we've got the 402 Elite, a team that will be playing against one of our divisional rivals this weekend, and they are pretty solidly in the front of their division, the White Division, at 8-2. The River City Gamblers behind them by 3.5 games. Jumping over to the East, we've got a tie up front in the Black Division between the Jersey Express and New York Hoop Dragons, currently both at 10-2. Tiebreaker would go by point differential, which I believe is actually going to be the Hoop Dragons currently, but they still got a couple more weeks to get things figured out on that end. Looking at the blue division, it looks like there is, I guess, technically a tie as well for that, with the division lead between the New Hampshire Kings and Massachusetts Wolves. Kings 11-5, Wolves at 7-1. So it'll be interesting to see if they hit that minimum game threshold. Again, still got some time left, but then we'll have to get a couple of games in there, or a few games in there, to hit that as far as we know. Going down to the red division, we got a tie in that division for the lead still, between the Central PA Kings and the Philly Thunder, both at 9-4. Kings, though, somehow with a negative 26 point differential, compared to the Thunder with a 252 positive point differential. So if it does come down to that, looks like the Thunder will probably prevail. But interesting to see there a team with a 9-4 record with a negative point differential. Then we've got the white division. One of the most competitive divisions there, with the Buffalo Extreme up on top, 16-1 over the Binghamton Bulldogs at 12-1. Currently 2 games behind, but two powerhouse teams that have been ranked throughout this season. Then we jump over to the South, and the Bulldogs, I believe, were the representative for the East in the Final Four last season. Then we jump to the South. The representative for the South last season in the Final Four, Mississippi Silverbacks, jumped up to number 2 in that division and the Black division in the South. Now 12-6 on a 7-game winning streak, but still with a -8 point differential, which is always interesting. But the Gulf Coast Gladiators look to have that number 1 seed secured in the division at 15-1. Still a lot of games though, or a lot of spots to be finalized in that division, though, as you see the Silverbacks 4 games behind, also the War Dogs 4 games behind, and then a couple of games back is Crusaders and the Knights. So still a little bit left to decide in that division. Let me jump over to the Blue division. Out in front is the Austin Bats. They've secured that number 1 spot. Then we've got a couple of matchups there still going on, pretty tight matchups. 1 game back for the 3 seed from the 2 seed, and then between the 3 and the 5 seed, all within another game. So definitely still some spots up for grabs there. Then we jump to the Red division, one that has a lot of teams in it. But the Columbus Skyhawks out in front right now with that 1 seed at 14-1. Got the Atlanta Aliens behind them only by a game at 14-3. So still to be decided there as far as the finals or the top spot. But got some games left going on in there in that big division. Then we jump down to the white division, and we've got the Kiss Me Lambs up on top, currently 14-1, and then we got the County Rolls a game behind at 14-3. So still to be seen who wins that division, but we've got a close matchup there as well. Jumping over to the West, we've got a tie up front in the Black division with the Legends and the Hounds in the Black division. Legends 13-2, Hounds 12-1. So still a lot on the line for those teams here in the last couple of weeks, or the last few weeks here in the regular season. Looking at the Blue division, they have the Tucson Buckets have that division locked up in that 1 seed. Then we've got the Red division and another number 1 spot locked up for the Silicon Valley Panthers, still undefeated on the season at 15-0. And they were the representatives in the championship weekend last season. Then we got the White division, and currently up in front. This is going to be an interesting scenario here. This is like the I guess you could say like the NFC South if you're a football fan, where it's a division that's got an opportunity to secure the number 1 seed and division title with a potentially losing record. But the City Cats currently at 6-6, with the Wolfpack a half game behind at 6-7. But just a little bit of time left in that division to see if somebody can pull out a winning record. If not, it'll go to the team with the best record. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. And then obviously, we'll jump into the playoffs once, we hit that point, or we'll play-ins first, then the playoffs. But one of those teams is going to walk out of the division with the division title. And then one will, walk out with the chance for the playoffs in the divisional round, or regional round, I should say. Once I get through that, we got the at-large teams. Some teams that were on the schedule, and some teams that have, stopped playing their games for the season, and then also some teams that are exhibition teams filling in throughout the season, but not competing for that playoff spot. But you see some of the teams that were on our schedule, the Pipples right there. They're 4-4, but they are not continuing. Same with the Blaze, 500 record, not continuing. Um, but you still have some teams here that play throughout the season, even though they just are not competing for that playoff spot. Like teams like the Chicago Knights we've been seeing, they still have been playing their games. And then obviously the Greyhounds, they just played this past weekend. Indiana Shuckers still playing as well. But the Monsters also have now jumped into this bracket of the rankings, as they're no longer competing this season. But that's what we got going on around the league. What we got coming up there in the next couple of weeks for the Instigators. And jump back and just look at our division one last time, and I think that'll be it for this week's episode of Instigate Success. So we've got the Fury at number 1, Inferno number 2, Saints number 3, us at number 4, your Hoosier State Instigators, and then the Frost at number 5. So we'll have to keep an eye on the matchups here this weekend. And actually, that's what I was thinking of doing, was jumping to the schedule. So we could see as far as Instigators' rooting interests for this weekend. I mean, obviously, I think right now you just got to root for your Instigators. I think the Inferno have locked up that number 2 seed, so really it makes no difference whether they win or lose for us. But pretty much we just need to win out our games, and that's the best case scenario for us. And then just let things fall out the way they happen to around the division. But that is what we will have coming up here in the future. Saints are the one team that we might have the shot to catch up in the rankings with. So that's what we still got going. But that is just a month left here or so. Actually, maybe a little bit less than a month left now for your regular season. 3 more games. One this weekend, again Sunday, will be our final regular season home game at Best Choice Fieldhouse in Fishers, Indiana. That's going to be on some Maysville Miners. So update to the schedule. That game originally scheduled for March 1st has been moved up. It is Sunday, February 16th. This Sunday will be at the Best Choice Fieldhouse. So if you're local, definitely go out and catch your Instigators. Cheer them on in their last home game at Best Choice Fieldhouse for their second ABA season. If not, as always, we'll be streaming the game live over on Patreon. Then we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel a few days after, once we are able to do the commentary and scoreboard keeping for that game. So that is what we got coming up this weekend. Next weekend, we'll have another double header, and that'll be against the Kings and the Aces, both on the road. So traveling out to Cincy and then out into Nashville to wrap up our regular season and potentially jump into that number 3 seed. And hopefully we can secure ourselves our first 10-win victories season, which would be pretty awesome. That's still up for grabs with 3 victories here. It's currently at 7-7. That would put us at 10-7. So that would be awesome. Regardless, though, we are going to finish with a better record than last season. But we still would like to have a winning record, and obviously a 10-win record would be nice as well. But then we got play-ins and playoffs coming up, and that is where it really matters. But that is gonna be it for tonight's episode of Instigate Success. That is, that's going to be it for tonight's episode. Thank you, as always, to everyone who joins us for the broadcast. all of our Patreon members. We're over 125. I think we're at 136 currently. Thank you to everyone who supports us, whether you're watching this over on our Twitch. Again, this is live over on Twitch, as well as on our Patreon. Live games are for Patreon members, anybody at that dollar tier or higher. But that's what we got going on for this weekend. Other thing to note, we did have a couple of newer guys on the roster this past weekend, or the weekend before. In the last matchups, Miro, a new center for the Instigators, had himself a pretty solid debut in his first 2 games. And then Greg Hardiman also back on the court, I think, for his second or third time for the Hoosier State Instigators. So a couple of new faces as well. But again, we have not had that fansman vote back just because of, obviously roster availability. We're still working on that. So in the future, obviously, when we got that opportunity to have the vote for the last spot, we are still going to be doing that. Just have not been able to with our roster availability. But just two other guys to keep your eyes out on the court for your Instigators if you're catching the stream this weekend. But again, everybody at that dollar tier or higher gets access to the live streams over on Patreon. Then we'll put that up on YouTube a few days after, once we do get the time to do the commentary and the rebroadcasting. But that's going to be tonight's episode. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Hopefully you have a wonderful Valentine's Day, whatever your plans may be. And if you are local to my area, hopefully if you're looking for some cookies, I'll be out delivering cookies here once I finish up this podcast. So that is what I'll be doing for my Valentine's Day. But that's it for tonight's episode 78 of Instigate Success, building an ABA franchise, your official Hoosier State Instigators podcast. Again, weekly, every week, Friday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern to about 10 or so. We'll be live here on Twitch and on Patreon for all of our loyal viewers. Again, thank you for joining us on tonight's episode. Catch the last home game of the regular season for the Instigators Sunday, not tomorrow. A little bit different. First time we're playing a home game in Best Choice Fieldhouse on a Sunday. So just keep that in mind. Sunday is that the final regular season home game for your Hoosier State Instigators. That's going to be against the Maysville Miners, a team that is making their inaugural season run, but they have had a pretty successful run so far this season, including a victory over the Lions. So until then, as always, be great and instigate.